It was a disaster season for the Raptors, who went into the year with high expectations, and when they fell short, they doubled down and failed again. But the events that were going on behind the scenes may have ultimately led to their demise, and maybe the real reason why Fred VanVleet left in free agency. Let's get into it. Welcome everybody to Amateur Hour Sports. This is the YouTube channel dedicated to Toronto Raptors content and videos just like this. If you like what you see from the video today, we're doing content like this all throughout the offseason, so please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and we're getting very close to that 15,000 subscriber milestone that you can help us hit. But a Michael Grange article from a few days ago has made its rounds all over social media. It was a loaded article filled with some very interesting information about the Raptors in many different endeavors. The predominant feature of the article was Pascal Siakam and the possibility of the Raptors moving on from the player this summer. After Fred VanVleet left in free agency, the team has lost a lot of its competitive edge. Sure, it can be a talented team that might make the play-in tournament once again and could sneak into a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference, but ultimately, fans aren't really thrilled with the current direction of the team. Pascal Siakam could change that, and that was the topic of discussion mostly in the Wednesday video. But also featured in the article here was a conversation about the locker room issues behind the scenes. There's been lots of speculation as to what went on behind the scenes for the Raptors, because it really felt like there was a disconnect amongst the players this season, where typically what has been the strength of the Raptors in their success over the last decade. After all, this team only has one losing season in the last decade of NBA play. What's been the strength of the Raptors is their strength in numbers, the unity within the group, this underdog mentality of these players building up and being something bigger than maybe other people expected they could be, winning the 2019 championship without a single lottery-picked player on the roster, consistently being doubted but still overachieving. But maybe on the outside it was overachieving, but on the inside it was just the expectation that was set by some great leaders like Kyle Lowry. But a lot of that went away this season, and we may have some more information now into exactly what may have gone on here. As we cite this Michael Grange article that was written here, there's some specific conversations about Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet as the leaders of this team. The team, after all, started, I believe it was 13-12 before losing back-to-back games to the Orlando Magic, and that's where this season completely spun out of control. And the Raptors, even at 13-12, it was a bit frustrating at the time, because this is a Raptors team coming off of 48 wins. This is a Raptors team coming off of a 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, and such a young team. We weren't just expecting to have a similar season. We were kind of expecting the team to take the next step and improve even further for the next season. And all these young players taking steps in the right direction, taking steps to become better players. But that didn't quite materialize, and players like Siakam and VanVleet had issue with that, and VanVleet apparently spoke out about it. We'll quote specifically what Michael Grange said here, and sources described a team where the veterans, VanVleet and Siakam especially, were deeply frustrated with the younger players on the roster, and VanVleet let them know about it. Some of the younger players didn't appreciate at all. Nurse wasn't able to bridge the divide as the key players kept getting hurt, and open three after open three drew only iron. The losing made everything worse. Winning heals everything. I'm sure you guys have seen The Last Dance. Michael Jordan, probably one of the biggest assholes in sports history, but the team always won. Michael Jordan is arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, so it was Michael Jordan just trying to get the best out of his players, because winning solves everything. So when you have the supposed leaders of your team sounding off on the younger players and losses continue to happen, it's just fuel to the fire. Things keep getting worse. The conversations around the players get worse because, well, things aren't improving. The losing makes everybody feel worse. The morale drops, and the coach couldn't solve these things. So this is where the conversations around Fred VanVleet not being the right leader for this team and being a supposed so-called locker room cancer, that's where the conversations have come from about the player, which is why I'd say I would love to get a real sample of this. Maybe we'll do it in a poll today, but I feel like the majority of the fan base did want to move on from the player and did want to go in a different direction. Now, we've spoken extensively about how the Raptors have downgraded their team as a result of having lost him in free agency, and it's yet another player who leaves for free. But some people think that the fresh start for this team is very nice to have. Dennis Schroeder comes in, is going to fill in on the bench. Scottie Barnes is going to slide into the point guard position, and the team can maybe pick up the pieces. But who was really in the wrong in this conversation? Was it the young players in the wrong for not playing well, or was it Fred VanVleet for coming on a little bit too strongly? I think ultimately where everything goes wrong is that it's a little bit of both. When talking about the veterans of the team, and specifically Siakam and VanVleet, these are guys who have done it before. These are guys who are NBA champions and were very essential pieces of that championship team in 2019. The expectation from them, all they've really known in Toronto is winning other than the Tampa season, so they want to get back to winning ways. Younger players are coming into the team and haven't quite experienced all those things. So Siakam and VanVleet are really trying to set the tone for what the culture of this team could be. Perhaps they came on a little bit too strongly. Perhaps they came on a little bit too harshly. Maybe they were not adept in being the leaders of this team. Maybe there were issues with the young players, because who would the actual young players of this team be? I guess that would include players who play a lot, like Scottie Barnes, Gary Trent Jr. would have to include those sort of players. And specifically, many people have spoken about Scottie Barnes and the potential effect Fred VanVleet had on his game this season. But ultimately, where a lot of the optimism for this season came from was Scottie Barnes was coming off of his Rookie of the Year performance. Gary Trent seemingly was going to take another step in the right direction, improve on defense, but we saw a regression from Gary Trent, and in a lot of categories, we also saw a regression from Scottie Barnes. Now, in certain spaces, Scottie Barnes did improve, and I still have extremely high hopes for the player. I'm not out on Scottie Barnes in any way whatsoever, but I think there were some issues in performances from individuals. Fred VanVleet, Pascal, Siakam, but it seems like mostly Fred VanVleet called that out. The players didn't like that, and that became an issue. Fred VanVleet, perhaps he came on too strongly. Perhaps the younger players didn't take the criticism well enough. We just won't really know exactly what went down in this situation. But also a key feature of this discussion is Fred VanVleet talking about these younger players not playing well and not holding up their end of the bargain. Well, Fred VanVleet himself wasn't quite holding up his end of the bargain, because especially at the start of the season, the player was struggling. As the season wore on, Fred VanVleet found more ways to affect the game rather than just his shooting, which never really found its legs over the course of the season. But Fred VanVleet ultimately had a good season, but it was a regression. Fred VanVleet had a far inferior season, or an inferior season to what he had in the previous season, where he was an NBA All-Star for the first time in his career. So I think ultimately that's where the disrespect was felt. Fred VanVleet trying to be the leader of this team, and when Kyle Lowry left, that was really the passing on of the torch. Fred VanVleet was going to be the leader of this team. Perhaps Fred wasn't equipped to be in that position, and perhaps Raptors fans looking at it, we had one of the greatest leaders maybe any team has ever had in Kyle Lowry, leading this team to that NBA championship, or being one of the leaders in that NBA championship run and this era in general. And we asked Fred VanVleet to be that sort of replacement for Kyle Lowry in terms of being the leader of this team. And Fred VanVleet just wasn't equipped to do that. This wasn't who he was. And we had these greater expectations for him in that setting in which he fell short. So ultimately, whose fault was it? Maybe most of it's on the older guys, the veteran players. Maybe most of it's on the younger players. I think in general, a lot went wrong and people just found ways to bicker, which created a bit of a locker room divide, and the losing didn't help. And ultimately, each of these things made the other worse. Losing made the locker room worse. The locker room made the losing worse, and things just completely spun out of control for the team. And it turned into a big hate mob over the season for Fred VanVleet, because the majority of people would put the blame on the older players, specifically like Fred VanVleet. So much so that fans sounded off so often against VanVleet that when he left the Raptors, his goodbye message included something about this. In the Instagram post, which you can pause to read the whole thing, but specifically what I want to highlight here is that he said, "I went from the fans not knowing who I was to fan favorite to most hated." And I mean, Fred's just having a little bit of fun after leaving the team. I don't think he's poking any jabs at anybody. I don't think he's really throwing any shade at anybody. He recognized it. I mean, did you see the conversation about the player for the entire year? He was the most hated player on the team by a comfortable degree, even after he leaves. There's still conversation about Fred VanVleet, how much people dislike him and hate him, which has always been strange to me, because the player truly embodies everything it is to be a Raptor, from an underdog mentality to willing his way into being in this position and really embodying everything the city means and representing the city. Like, this should be a player that Raptors fans love and adore, but it just didn't pan out in that way. And it just seems as though the locker room issues were fully put on him for, maybe good reason, maybe for bad reason, but the locker room issues were pegged against him. And ultimately, that could have led to Fred VanVleet leaving. That could have opened up those conversations about the player leaving in free agency. I mean, after a full season of taking on so much disrespect from the fan base, I wouldn't necessarily want and have a big want to stay with that team and continue to play under that fan base. But it also helps when there's 130 or so million reasons why over the course of 3 years that you could lead the team as well. Based on the whole situation around Fred VanVleet, I think that certainly could have played on his mind. And for the fact that he actually cited the hate in his goodbye post, that certainly played on his mind in the free agent discussions. But the fact that the Houston Rockets had to upgrade their offer from a 2-year, $83 million offer to a 3-year, $128 million offer. I know that the third year is a team option, but still, just having the potential of getting that money in the third year. The fact that Houston had to upgrade the offer meant that Fred VanVleet had a good conversation with the Raptors when free agency opened up. It seemed like he was intent on staying with the Raptors, but once Houston upgraded the offer, it simply was an offer that he could not refuse. But something like this had to have played on the mind. So overall, what does this mean for the upcoming season? Whatever the reason was, Fred VanVleet had a part to play in the locker room issues of the team and ultimately had a part to play in the Raptors not hitting their stride and getting to the levels expected for the season and only winning 41 games. So it feels as though this player leaving, that real leadership figure, that real face of the team in certain respects, not quite talent-wise because that's Siakam, but it feels like maybe moving on from Fred VanVleet, as bad as it was to lose him for free, as bad as it is to one-of-one replace him with Dennis Schroeder, we can pick up the pieces in other ways. Dennis Schroeder is going to be a good addition to the bench. We'll see what Scottie Barnes can produce in the point guard position. And now, really, no excuses. If Fred VanVleet was the problem, then this team should hit their stride and have a wonderful season. If Fred VanVleet wasn't necessarily the problem, well, we've lost out on a great player here for absolutely nothing. It will never be worth losing Fred VanVleet for free, but we'll see how the team can pick up the pieces here and how maybe with a fresh start and a fresh mindset, we can get the most out of Scottie Barnes and just getting a new season, a full summer under his belt after not having a great second season, a bit of a sophomore slump sort of season in many respects. Well, what is he going to work on now to make sure that he can take his game to the next level? What can Gary Trent do under a more tactical coach? I'm expecting some big things over there. And even with the team getting slightly worse based on the offseason losses and acquisitions, this team can still be a playoff team. Let's see how far they can go and do it this season. Let me know your thoughts and opinions about this in the comments down below. I can't imagine the comment section is going to be very friendly today, but feel free to sound off and let your opinion be heard. I'll be sure to check it out later. If you did enjoy, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Amateur Hour Sports for more content just like this. I'll see you guys again very soon, probably on Monday, for another video.